I'll never forget that night. It started like any other evening, with the usual pretense of laughter and smiles in our grand dining room, the chandeliers casting warm light over crystal glasses and polished silverware. But in an instant, everything shattered. I had spent hours preparing for his surprise birthday party for him, quietly hoping for even a small acknowledgement of my effort, only to be met with a blow I hadn't seen coming. He looked at me across the room, that smirk curling on his lips, and said almost casually, "Honestly, I'd rather kiss a dog than you tonight." The words landed like ice water, freezing my chest and knocking the air out of me. Laughter erupted around us, friends, colleagues, family, but all I could hear was the echo of his cruelty. My mind spun, struggling to process the humiliation, the disbelief, the sheer sting of being dismissed so publicly. Every compliment, every gesture I had ever offered him suddenly felt like a lie I'd believed in blindly. I wanted to disappear, to sink beneath the floorboards and never face anyone again. I could feel my hands trembling as a flush of shame crept up my neck. And for the first time, I truly questioned whether he had ever loved me, or if I had simply been a prop in his gilded life. The room continued its polite chatter, oblivious to the dagger in my heart, while I sat frozen replaying the words, imagining every cruel variation, trying to understand how someone I had trusted could wound me so deeply, so publicly. I realized then that nothing about that life, that marriage, or that man would ever protect me from this kind of humiliation. And in that terrifying moment, as laughter danced cruelly in the background, I swore I would never be powerless again. From the outside, our life looked perfect. The kind of perfect that made neighbors whisper, colleagues envy, and social media followers double tap with admiration. Our mansion gleamed with marble floors, high ceilings, and art that cost more than some people earn in a lifetime. The garage always held at least 3 luxury cars, each polished to a mirror finish, engines purring like trophies waiting for approval. We hosted elegant parties where everyone smiled, toasting our happiness with champagne that sparkled as much as the crystal chandeliers. Yet behind the walls of that picture-perfect world, I felt an emptiness I couldn't escape. While guests admired his charm and confidence, I noticed the small cracks, the way he ignored me in conversations, brushed off my opinions, and laughed at my concerns as if they were frivolous. I began to see the truth that luxury couldn't hide. The man I married was shallow, self-centered, and incapable of genuine connection. Nights spent in opulent silence became routine, and I realized that no amount of wealth, no grand gesture or social acclaim could fill the void of being unseen and undervalued. That contrast between the dazzling public life and my private neglect gnawed at me, each polished surface reflecting a life that looked enviable but felt hollow, and it was the first time I truly acknowledged the depth of my unhappiness. Even surrounded by opulence, I felt invisible. The silence of our mansion was suffocating, each echo of my footsteps a reminder that I had no one to confide in. I carried my resentment quietly, like a hidden wound, forcing smiles when friends and family visited, pretending everything was perfect. Nights were the worst. Alone in our enormous bedroom, staring at walls lined with expensive paintings, I replayed moments that had cut deeper than any harsh words could. There was the time he praised my sister for a trivial achievement, while my years of effort went unnoticed. Or the holidays when I went out of my way to organize family gatherings, only to have him dismiss my planning as overbearing. I remembered birthdays and anniversaries that seemed like mine alone to celebrate, because he never remembered, never cared. Even small acts, like ignoring my contributions to conversations or laughing at my ideas, added up into a constant undercurrent of rejection. I loved him once, desperately, believing in the image he projected, the charming, successful man. But slowly, I recognized the pattern of neglect. The mansion, the parties, the laughter of others, all of it highlighted my isolation. I felt trapped in a gilded cage, my voice unheard, my heart quietly breaking, and a quiet anger began to simmer beneath the surface, whispering that someday I would no longer let myself be invisible. One evening, I lingered near the kitchen doorway while he spoke on the phone, thinking it was a routine business call. But the words that spilled out froze me in place. He was mocking my closest friends, calling them pathetic and unworthy of my attention, and sneering at my family as if their love and support were nothing more than inconveniences. Every insult he uttered, every careless remark, cut through me like a blade. But instead of tears, a new emotion began to bloom, quiet, simmering determination. I realized that his arrogance was boundless, that he believed no one, least of all me, could ever challenge him. And in that moment, a plan began to take shape in my mind. Not a reckless, impulsive scheme, but a calculated path to reclaim what had been stolen from me. My dignity, my voice, my power. I imagined the tables turning, the smug smile wiped from his face, the same shock and disbelief mirrored back at him that I had endured. For the first time, the humiliation I had suffered began to transform into fuel. I would no longer be the invisible wife who endured his cruelty silently. Something had shifted inside me that night, and I knew the moment of reckoning was coming. I just had to wait, watch, and act with patience and precision. After that night, I knew I couldn't act impulsively. Anger alone wouldn't be enough to dismantle the life he had built on arrogance and deception. I needed proof, undeniable evidence that would expose the man behind the polished smile, the empire built on greed, manipulation, and selfishness. I began quietly collecting everything: emails, invoices, whispered conversations I recorded without his knowledge, and small inconsistencies in his business dealings. I watched him at parties, noting every boastful exaggeration, every careless insult, every time he demeaned someone to elevate himself. I traced the patterns of favoritism in his company, the backhanded promotions, and the contracts that exploited employees, all while keeping my curiosity invisible. Each discovery deepened the tension inside me. The more I learned, the more I realized just how fragile his empire truly was. Yet I kept calm, patient, pretending to be the dutiful wife who admired his success, all the while meticulously mapping out the foundations I could one day shake. The thrill of secret knowledge mingled with fear, creating a quiet storm inside me. For the first time, I felt the power of strategy, the intoxicating sense that I could take control without a single person suspecting my intentions. Every detail I documented became a weapon, and my mind, once clouded by humiliation and hurt, now sharpened into something deliberate and precise, ready for the moment when the scales would finally tip in my favor. The night of the gala arrived, a glittering event meant to showcase his wealth and influence. Guests arrived in gowns that shimmered like liquid gold, men in tailored tuxedos, all eager to be part of his curated world. I walked beside him, head held high, masking the storm of anger and dread that churned inside me. As he mingled, I could see the habitual arrogance in his posture, the smug way he dismissed others with a flick of his hand or a sarcastic remark. Then, in front of a cluster of investors and socialites, he turned to me with a sneer and said, "Honestly, you're lucky anyone even tolerates you in these circles. I can't imagine anyone taking you seriously." Laughter erupted, soft at first, then louder, as if the room itself conspired to echo his cruelty. But I didn't flinch. I smiled politely, letting the insult hang in the air, while the eyes of others began to shift. Some looked at him with raised brows, subtle expressions of doubt crossing their faces. The same people who had once admired him now sensed the arrogance behind the charm, the tiny cracks in the perfect facade. I felt a quiet satisfaction, a thrill hidden beneath my composed exterior. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. Even amidst the luxury, the sparkling dresses and the clinking glasses, I realized that public perception was fragile, and his empire of admiration could start to crumble if handled correctly. I left the encounter with a measured calm, letting the tension linger, knowing that society's whispers were the first tremors of the upheaval I was quietly engineering. I knew I couldn't dismantle him alone. His influence was too vast, his arrogance too blinding. That's when I reached out to someone I trusted completely, a former colleague with sharp legal instincts and a mind that could dissect any financial empire. We met in a quiet cafe, away from the eyes of the world, and I laid everything out. His public cruelty, the hidden injustices, the patterns I had been tracking for months. She listened carefully, nodding as I spoke, then asked pointed questions about contracts, business partners, and personal habits. Together, we began sketching a roadmap, identifying vulnerabilities and weaknesses he had carelessly left exposed. Each suggestion sparked new possibilities, each piece of evidence I had gathered finding its purpose in our strategy. I realized how patient and clever I had to be, how timing and subtlety could make his downfall spectacular without him suspecting a thing. As we pored over documents and timelines, I felt a surge of control I hadn't known in years. The first hints of power reversal flickered in my mind. The man who had humiliated me, ignored me, and underestimated me was about to meet consequences he could never foresee. It was intoxicating, this combination of intellect, patience, and quiet confidence, and for the first time, I felt the thrill of being a step ahead. I moved like a ghost through the life we'd built. Invisible by design and deadly in intention, small things were my first weapons, subtle, surgical nudges that nobody would blame on me. I started with the accounts, quiet transfers to dormant entities, enough to create patterns of irregularities but small enough to seem clerical. I found an old ledger on his phone and copied suspicious entries to a secure drive. I fed anomalies to my confidant's legal inbox, letting patience be our strategy. Next, I planted doubts in the corners where his ego lived. Industry columns, charity committees, social editors who chronicled our every move. I didn't smear him. I let facts breathe. An offhand mention of delayed payrolls here, a quietly sourced note about a contractor there. Tiny seeds that made people look twice. I encouraged one of his long-ignored employees to speak with a journalist under anonymity, sharing patterns of favoritism and coerced contracts. The piece that appeared was careful and factual, the kind of reporting that nudges a boardroom to take notice. I cataloged his personal indiscretions with the same meticulous hand. Messages, receipts, invoices that contradicted his public claims, evidence that charisma could not explain away. There was the bill for a suite he swore was for investors, a hotel confirmation with a name that was not ours, a photograph from a private jet with an unlisted passenger. Each item was time-stamped, copied, and stored in triplicate. I refused to act on emotion. Every revelation had to land at the precise moment it would hurt most. Legal pressure arrived like a cool wind before a storm. We seeded a class-action whisper in the right circles and quietly engaged a firm known for high-profile suits. A discreet subpoena, a demand for records, nothing dramatic, but enough that his board began to murmur. He ignored the first emails, laughed off cursory phone calls, and assured everyone the rumors were ridiculous. Publicly, he performed confidence. Privately, he missed calls and grew terse in meetings. He blamed scheduling conflicts and the pressure of growth, but I watched how the mask slipped in private. The strangest thing was how ordinary my days became while orchestrating the collapse. I kept my routines, morning runs, charity galas, practice smiles, so no one would see a woman armed with evidence. Nights were different. I sat on the edge of our bed with folders stacked like quiet grenades, reading contracts and redactions by lamplight. Sometimes a rush of guilt hit me, soft and irrational. It passed quickly. There was a serene clarity in knowing I had reclaimed authorship over my life. Fear visited me in small ways. Once he asked point blank if I was hiding anything. His tone tried for casual, but a tremor ran beneath it. I gave a laugh, a joke about misplacing keys, watched him swallow suspicion. He remained blissfully unaware that the woman who brewed his morning coffee had been orchestrating his downfall. Every boast he made about his cleverness became a line item in my inventory of vulnerabilities. As whispers became inquiries and auditors began to nudge, the social calendar that had been our armor no longer shielded him. Invitations were reconsidered. Donations paused. Longtime allies checked their distance. None of it detonated overnight. That was deliberate. My moves were patient and precise, small cuts that widened into an infection. I watched from the sidelines as his circle thinned and his smile slipped, and I felt a cold, steady satisfaction settle in my chest. Years of silence had taught me patience, not paralysis. I had quietly converted humiliation into strategy and grief into calculation. Every document I placed and every whisper I seeded felt like reclaiming a chapter of my life. I was not driven by cruelty alone, but by the need to take back my story and stand unashamed. The next move would force a confrontation he could no longer avoid, and I felt ready. It happened quietly at first, a subtle dip in profits, a delayed contract approval. But he noticed. One evening, he stormed into our home office, face red, eyes sharp with disbelief and rage. "Do you have any idea what's happening with the accounts?" He spat, pacing like a caged animal. "Everything's a mess and I don't know why." I remained seated, calm, pretending to review a report, letting his fury build. "You've been hiding something," he accused, the volume rising, voice echoing off the marble floors. "Tell me you haven't been meddling in my business." I looked up slowly, letting the silence stretch before I replied in measured tones. "I've simply been paying attention. Things that were ignored before needed oversight." His laugh was bitter, sharp, dripping with condescension. "Oversight? Don't pretend you're competent. You wouldn't understand half of this empire." I met his gaze evenly, letting the contrast between his arrogance and my collected demeanor settle in the room. "Perhaps not," I said softly, "but I understand enough to notice the cracks you've ignored." His fists clenched, a twitch of anger betraying his composure, while I leaned back, calm and deliberate. Every insult he hurled, every threat, became evidence of his hubris, and I knew this confrontation was a necessary step in the unraveling. Around us, the air thickened with tension. The silent room seemed to hold its breath. I let him rail while internally I mapped the next moves, the legal steps, the subtle exposures that would strip away his public mask. In the heat of his outburst, I felt a surge of vindication, a quiet thrill in knowing that his world, once untouchable, was beginning to crumble in ways he could neither anticipate nor control. This moment wasn't the finale, but it was the first undeniable proof that the scales had shifted. The day it all broke open felt surreal. One carefully orchestrated leak after another had built a foundation, and now the entire structure of his so-called empire began to unravel publicly. Financial mismanagement, hidden offshore accounts, and contracts that exploited employees hit the press simultaneously. Social media lit up with whispers, then headlines. The arrogance, greed, and deceit that had once been invisible were suddenly under glaring scrutiny. I watched from our private study as notifications and news alerts piled up, each one confirming the effectiveness of our meticulous planning. He sat across from me, storming, pacing, yelling at assistants and legal counsel, trying desperately to contain the chaos that had escaped his control. There were emails leaked showing personal betrayals, favoritism, manipulation, even private insults toward partners and friends. Public opinion shifted almost overnight. Board members questioned his competence. Longtime investors demanded explanations, and former allies quietly distanced themselves. The contrast between his gilded life of yesterday and the crumbling reality of today was stark. The man who had humiliated me, laughed at my concerns, and flaunted his power now faced the same shock, disbelief, and scrutiny he had so often inflicted on others. I felt a steady, cold satisfaction, watching the arrogance that had once dominated every room dissolve under public judgment. Power reversal number 2 had arrived. He was no longer untouchable. His empire, built on inflated confidence and unchecked ego, was vulnerable, and I had orchestrated every step to ensure this collapse was both thorough and unavoidable. The satisfaction wasn't just in the downfall, it was in the precision, the inevitability of it, a poetic justice that mirrored the humiliation I had endured for years. While the world watched him stumble, I remained composed, knowing that the painstaking patience, the careful planning, and the evidence I had gathered had created a public reckoning he could never escape. It was a moment of complete reversal. The scales balanced at last, and I finally allowed myself to exhale, witnessing the empire, and the man who had built it, fall spectacularly under the weight of his own arrogance. The confrontation I had been waiting for arrived at what should have been his crowning moment, a gala celebrating his success, attended by investors, socialites, and media alike. He stood on stage, chest puffed, basking in applause, convinced he was untouchable. I walked in quietly, my presence barely noticed at first, until all eyes subtly shifted toward me. The timing was perfect. I approached the podium as he finished his speech, and the room fell into a hush. Calmly, I began to speak, recounting facts he had thought hidden, each revelation precise and undeniable. Financial missteps, unethical dealings, and the personal betrayals that had marked his rise. My voice was steady, unwavering, each word a scalpel cutting through the facade he had built for years. Gasps rippled through the audience as documents and images I had prepared were displayed, leaving no room for denial. His face paled, the arrogance that had once defined him evaporating under the weight of proof and public scrutiny. He opened his mouth, tried to interject, but stammered, caught in a web of his own making. The murmurs grew louder, whispers of disbelief and shock spreading through the crowd. I watched the subtle shift in glances and posture, the confidence of allies crumbling, respect evaporating, admiration replaced with doubt. The tables had turned completely. The man who had humiliated me, dismissed me, and flaunted his power now struggled to maintain even a shred of composure in front of everyone who had once revered him. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the sweet, almost intoxicating surge of vindication. Years of quiet patience, careful observation, and strategic action had culminated in this precise, emotionally charged moment. As he finally slumped, shoulders heavy with shame, I allowed myself the satisfaction of knowing that justice, meticulously calculated, had been served. This was the triumph I had envisioned, the moment where humiliation met truth, and the audience, witnessing it all, felt the soaring high of long-awaited emotional vindication. In the weeks that followed, life transformed in ways I hadn't dared imagine. The empire he had clung to crumbled completely, and with it, his influence over friends, colleagues, and family faded into quiet whispers. I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years, a sense of freedom that was almost dizzying. No longer trapped by his arrogance or constrained by his indifference, I could finally make decisions for myself, guided by clarity rather than fear. Socially, people treated me with a new respect. Invitations arrived without expectation, and my voice carried weight for the first time. Privately, I spent long nights reflecting on the journey, the humiliation, the loneliness, the painstaking planning that had brought me here. Each memory reminded me of the resilience I had cultivated, the intelligence and patience I had honed in silence. I realized that my victory wasn't just about dismantling his world. It was about reclaiming my identity and dignity. There was a bittersweet undertone, too, the knowledge that he, once so dominant, now struggled with consequences he had never foreseen. Yet that sorrow was tempered by pride, by the moral clarity that comes from knowing you've righted the wrongs imposed on you without compromising who you are. I was empowered, independent, and unshakably myself, and in that quiet triumph, I discovered a peace I had long sought, the satisfaction of justice served, tempered with the grace of reflection and growth. Sitting alone on the terrace of our once-shared mansion, I sipped a glass of wine, the city lights stretching endlessly below me. The house no longer felt like a cage, but a sanctuary, a testament to the life I had reclaimed. My thoughts wandered over the months of careful planning, the patience it had taken, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing truth prevail. Luxury surrounded me, soft cashmere on my shoulders, polished silverware in the kitchen, but it no longer defined me. It was a backdrop to my freedom. For the first time, I didn't feel small, invisible, or powerless. I felt sharp, aware, and in control of my own destiny. The relief was intoxicating, a deep exhale I had carried in my chest for years. I allowed myself a smile, a private acknowledgement of the triumph that belonged solely to me. In that quiet moment, surrounded by wealth that no longer dictated my worth, I understood the true victory: autonomy, dignity, and the knowledge that I had rewritten the narrative of my life on my own terms. Looking back, I realize how long I had let others define my worth, how much of myself I had hidden to fit into the role he assigned me. Now, I stand fully myself, unafraid and unashamed, carrying the lessons of betrayal, resilience, and patience. Every humiliation I endured, every slight I absorbed, became fuel for the life I now lead, one of confidence, strategy, and self-respect. Those who underestimate me, who assume silence equals weakness, are mistaken. I have learned that power can be cultivated quietly, invisibly, and unleashed with precision. I smile privately at memories of his arrogance, knowing that his downfall was inevitable once I stopped fearing his judgment. Yet there is a lingering thrill in the unknown, the knowledge that the world will never again be able to predict or control me. I have rewritten my story, reclaimed my dignity, And in doing so, I've found satisfaction deeper than any wealth or social recognition could provide. This is my triumph, my warning, and my truth. Underestimate me at your own peril, because I have learned the art of patience, strategy, and unstoppable vindication.